Hello. Today I'm going to give you a short demonstration of EO Consulting's new schools benchmarking tool using the latest business intelligence technology by focusing on the special educational needs sector. I'm going to focus our analysis around SEN schools in Worcestershire, in particular Chadsgrove School, who we have been working with. From EO's Business Intelligence Portal homepage, I'm going to select the CFR Special Dashboard and go to the School Trend Overview tab and look for Chadsgrove School. We can see that over the last 3 years, Chadsgrove's income has exceeded expenditure by £179 per pupil, while nationally the average school has been able to build a surplus of nearly £550 per pupil more. Indeed, in the previous 2 years the school ran a deficit, and looking at the non-staff spend graph, it would appear that the operational costs and learning resources were higher in these years, which is usually due to capital refresh. And indeed, isolating for ICT equipment and maintenance shows where the main reduction has come from. Staffing expenditure seems stable and slightly rising as would be expected, but I'm going to quickly cross-reference with the school's workforce data to see if there are any worrying trends. Staff to pupil ratios are stable and benchmark well. And the only thing to keep an eye on is teachers' salaries, which are £1,600 more than the Worcestershire average, but are on a slightly downward trajectory. Going back to CFR dashboards, I'm going to go to the School Allocation Overview tab and compare Chadsgrove's 217 spend with other community special schools within the medium free school meal band. Two things are immediately apparent. First, Rigby Hall and Fort Royal spends proportionally more on teachers and TAs respectively. And second, a disproportionate amount of Chadsgrove's income is made from facilities and donations. If we isolate for these elements, you can see that while composition of teaching staff costs may differ, the levels aren't too out of kilter. Although Rigby Hall not only spends the most on classroom teaching staff at over 72% of total expenditure, it also has seen a sharp rise over the last 3 years, as shown by the green line in the proportionate change graph. Chadsgrove spends just above the sample set average at 68%. But the most striking variance seems to be the level of third-party income Chadsgrove is achieving, accounting for a quarter of all its income. This requires further analysis from the 3-year trend tab. Comparing Chadsgrove in blue against the average of other Worcestershire community SEN schools in grey, and separating the cohort-driven grant funding over all staff costs, we can see that Chadsgrove's spend on staff has increased by 12% over the last 3 years, while its grant funding has only gone up by 4%. This contrasts with the other Worcestershire SEN schools whose grant funding has increased nearly 2% faster than staff expenditure. This suggests that Chadsgrove could be receiving a raw deal. Indeed, if we isolate for delegated funding, it is slightly puzzling that Chadsgrove receives nearly £1,000 per pupil or 13% less delegated funding from the LA than the highest school, Picture Oak. You would hope success at achieving third-party revenue is not being used as a balancing item. Digging a bit deeper by enlarging the income table, we can see that over the last 3 years, the change in income is inversely correlated with the level of average per pupil income. So those whose income per pupil are lowest have seen the largest proportional increase in grant funding. Let's have a look to see what might be driving this by isolating just SEN funding. Here you can see that the inverse correlation is even stronger. Now, I'm no expert in SEN funding, but this could suggest that either needs-based composition is being more evenly spread across Worcestershire, or there has been a change in the funding bands in favour of the lower end. Clearly, a more pupil-focused comparative analysis would be required. If we go to the actual income versus expenditure tab, we can assess how Chadsgrove is bridging the funding gap. We have Chadsgrove on the left in blue, the Worcestershire average in the middle in black, and then our selected comparator school, Picture Oak, on the right in orange. We are again comparing cohort-driven grant funding with all staff expenditure. You can see that as a proportion, Chadsgrove is running a 12% deficit in these areas, while Picture Oak, in contrast, is running a 20% surplus. In monetary terms, this translates into a 28k deficit and a 41k surplus, or in per pupil terms, a 2.24k deficit versus a 2.93k surplus, or a gap between Chadsgrove and Pitcher-Oak of over £5,000 per pupil. Now if we add third-party income, I'll enlarge the category breakdown so you can better see that I'm adding facilities income and donations. You can see that the position changes. Chadsgrove now has a higher surplus than Pitcher-Oak, 580k compared to 440k, and this translates on a per pupil basis to a surplus of 4.8k at Chadsgrove, 3.2k at Pitcher-Oak, and 3.8k on average for similar Worcestershire SEN schools. Interestingly, if we remove donations from the list, we can see that over the last 2 years, Chadsgrove has been covering all its staff costs with cohort-driven grant funding and facilities income. Now I know that Chadsgrove has a hydrotherapy pool, so I'm going to see how its utilities spend compares with Wyre Forest, which also has a hydrotherapy pool, by going to the per pupil expenditure comparison tab. First, you can see the notable achievement of Chadsgrove allocating the same proportion of spend on teaching and learning, despite the comparative funding gap. And second, you can see that Chadsgrove utility costs don't benchmark well. Now this might be due to either the age distribution of the buildings, the fact that Wyre Forest has 80% more pupils to spread over the capacity charge threshold, or because Chadsgrove is locked into a 2-year contract while others have benefited from falling prices. Either way, this warrants further examination. I'm now going to go to our savings dashboard and compare Chadsgrove and the similar sized Pitcher-Oak with all non-London special schools. You can see that Chadsgrove's spend per pupil is in the 64th percentile, while Pitcher-Oak appears far more efficient, being in the 19th percentile. We need to take care here. This type of benchmarking analysis can give a false impression. For while it is satisfactory for evaluating the efficiency of much more homogeneous schools like primaries, it fails where the cohort makeup can so significantly vary. Better to focus on areas only where you would expect a degree of similarity, like back office functions. So I'm going to select operational costs, utilities, not catering because how provision is provided can vary, admin supplies, and those elements in other that are back office related only. You can see that Chadsgrove is now spending less in these areas than Pitcher-Oak, but still mid-table. If it was to improve to the best performing Worcestershire SEN school, in this case Rigby Hall, which is in the 20th percentile, then potentially £500 per pupil or 68k in total could be saved. I'm going to isolate spending on admin and clerical staff to check whether there is a cost to achieving such significant third-party revenue. You can see that there is. Chadsgrove's spend in this area is in the 74th percentile, and were it to spend the same amount as Pitcher-Oak, then it could save 1.5k per pupil. That said, we have already discovered it is attaining 5k additional third-party revenue, so the payback is clear. Because each special school can have quite unique qualities, and this is especially the case with PRUs, you are unlikely to get a good benchmarking group from within your own local authority. So I'm going to go to the School Expenditure Comparison tab and look for schools that are within 8 pupils of Chadsgrove, and then search for these on the map, concentrating on the West Midlands area. You can see that there are 4 similar schools that over the last 3 years have averaged a similar spend per pupil as Chadsgrove, notably the Meadows, the Orchard and Woodfield. Inputting these schools, we can now compare them on the spend per pupil graph, which I will enlarge to full screen and drill down into expenditure areas as appropriate. A quick view of the spend composition suggests the Orchard School is the best regional benchmarking comparator school. And finally, if we return to our 3-year trend tab, you can see that against this revised and perhaps more appropriate benchmarking set, Chadsgrove has still been able to increase staff spending well above total cohort grant funding, thanks to outperformance of third-party income. Well, that finishes our 10-minute scamper around benchmarking Chadsgrove with other SEN schools in Worcestershire and a more applicable regional sample set. I hope you have found the demonstration interesting and appreciate how this tool represents a step change in quickly getting to grips with how your school is performing. If you'd like to know more about how to get access to your suite of dashboards, then please do contact us at info@eoconsult.com. Thanks for listening.